All right, good morning, everybody. That was a great keynote, wasn't it? It's really, really good. The good news is we're going to start with a light talk. We're not going to start super technical. This talk today is a conversation I have with my colleagues all the time. So I wanted to broaden the discussion, bring it to B-sides and see, show some of the newer people to the industry, what we've been dealing with, where we've come from. Maybe some of the experienced people here, you know you're not alone. Other people are going through the same things you're going through. So I'm James Phillips. And as you can hear, I'm Canadian. So as of May, I moved to the UK. And as of July, I'm still homeless. It takes forever to purchase a house in the UK here. But, over 20 years experience, incident response, digital forensics, security architecture. I apologize in advance if you do see any errors, because like I said, I'm currently living at a hotel, so a lot of this is done on the run and with spotty Wi-Fi. But thoroughly enjoying my time in the UK so far. So I always start off with why B-sides. And the first part is, it fosters learning and sharing ideas. There's no marketing pitch. I'm not giving you a marketing pitch. Nobody here will give you a marketing pitch. Vendors are clearly outlined over there. So it encourages you to participate and learn. I love that. I go to a lot of conferences. A lot of the big conferences, don't really like them. And for me, personally, why B-sides? Because it's about lifelong commitment to learning. Even though I've been in the industry over 20 years, I will take something away from B-sides, guaranteed. Whether it's networking, whether it's a new way of doing something, a new way of thinking about something. That is something you can get from a grassroots conference like this. So it's important to realize, why are we here and why do we need to keep this going? So the goal of the presentation is to provide my own experiences as a hands-on incident responder, forensic analyst, that person who Friday night at 5 o'clock guaranteed is getting a call, which is now going to ruin the weekend. So I decided to look at this from the past 10 years. Because really the last 10 years has seen a lot of changes, way more than the previous 10 years. So if we look at 2013, maybe down to 2003, 2000s, not so many changes in that. But if you look at 2013 to 2024, where we are today, seismic shifts in the industry and how we operate the tools and the attacks and the attack vectors. The caveat is, these are my experiences from where I work, what I do. So yes, there's many other tools, there's many other teams, how they operate. I'm talking about my experience. And it's a very, very wide selection of experience from government, various governments, finance, manufacturing, utilities. So 2013, thrift shop, it's on the radio. Miley Cyrus is coming in like a wrecking ball. Wolf of Wall Street. It's a time. Now, 2013, to some of us, wasn't that long ago, especially those of us who say we've been in the industry over 20 years. It wasn't that long ago. If you're new to the industry, you have no idea what was going on at that time. 2013, I had just re-entered the field after teaching at a public college in Canada for over 8 years, and primarily teaching government, so police officers, correctional officers, border officers, and forensics and investigation techniques. I got a job as a senior analyst. That's why I came out of teaching. I said they offered me a job, I took it. Canadian telco, with, at the time, was a very busy practice. Because I was very tuned into what the big fours were doing and what a lot of other banks and things were doing. So this practice here was 7 to 8 full-time analysts with a caseload of 4 to 6 cases each at varying stages. Because as you can imagine, there's downtime. In forensics, as you all know, there's imaging, and then there's analysis, and there's searching, there's all kinds. So as one thing's happening over here, you hop on another case, you start some things over. So you have 4 to 6 cases on the go. Just have a little picture here of what it looks like for what we call analyst row. So we all sat along there, and then behind us were the managers. There were 3 managers that sat behind us at the case review and things like that. So the type of cases we were working on at that time, municipalities hacked by exploiting cold fusion. So cold fusion was a middleware package that a lot of townships, municipalities used for their online system for paying your tax. And once this exploit kind of got noticed, and there was this one part in Canada where, in particular, 5 municipalities used exactly the same package and got hit in exactly the same way. So we were called in. I did that investigation, had 5 minutes. Because once I did one, and the other 4 municipalities caught on that I did the investigation, knew what was going on, then it was like, help, 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 help. And from there, it was quite busy. So we managed to track down exactly how it happened, what they took, and kind of pointed to who was behind it. And oddly enough, it was actually not somebody from another country, it's somebody local. Provincial government sensitive information leak. Now, this was an interesting one. There was a floor in a province in Canada of provincial workers, and some very sensitive information had hit the paper. And the minister for that area knew it could only come from one place, one floor. Now, keep in mind, there was a bit of theatrics here that was part of the investigation. So imagine 2 long tables set up, and we had our imaging devices, the logic cubes. We had 8 logic cubes on each table, and we had a bunch of analysts go out and seize every single computer on the floor, which was about 200 computers. So that was kind of the theatrics part, is we just went through it. Create carts, computers, catalog, pull the hard drives, start imaging. And the theatrics part was is that by the time we were done, there was a person on the floor who actually did confess. It was me, because they knew we were going to find it, because we took every computer on that floor. Oh, am I changing things here? University hacked by an insecure remote connection. So basically, their information was leaked. We have no idea how it got leaked. We did the investigation. I can't tell you what country, but I can tell you there was a country in particular, and it was just an insecure telnet channel. They got on, downloaded everything, and it was a pretty important project between a college and a university. And then, disgruntled employee corrupts database of government agency. This one here falls under criminals aren't smart, right? So we do the investigation. We find out through the investigation, looking through the database, what credentials were used. And then we start thinking, well, how could they be used? And we track down to the IP address. And then in Canada, you can get a production order to find out where that is. Got the IP. Geez, the credentials that were used match where this guy lives. So it basically boiled down to you do the investigation, just a disgruntled employee. But that gives you an idea of what we were dealing with at that time, the cases I was working on. I always like to put this one on here. This goes back before 2013. I was actually a contract investigator for the province of Ontario. Had my little mobile kit here, and they would just basically send me to the most remote places you could imagine. And, at that time, most of the cases we were working on were employee-based. You probably all remember, right? There was tons of harassment, tons of inappropriate internet. Oh, it was constantly inappropriate. So-and-so was surfing this on the web. So we had a little case, and we would show up, all the hard drive, do the report. But at that time, we were dealing with distributed denial of service, web defacement, data theft. Web scraping was a big one. Web scraping was huge. There were lots of companies out there that had some pretty intricate code, like airlines and things like that, and the loyalty websites. And we were constantly doing investigations for people that were scraping content off and then creating their own website and similar routines. Corporate espionage, I already mentioned about academic research. And at this time, mobile forensics was very popular. Celebrate, magnet forensics, we were doing lots of phones at this time. It was fairly easy. We could do a phone very, very quickly, pump out an easy report. So dealing with colleges, universities, government, large. The emphasis at this time was forensics. That was the emphasis. The tools of the time. Now, these are the tools I used. Lots more. Anybody recognize these pictures? Yeah. So, good old Tableau device. The Logic Cube Falcon. Imaging, lots and lots of hard drive forensic copying. So EnCase is probably the biggest forensic tool. Access Data was great because it was more forensic meets e-discovery, email parsing, really, really good. Magnet forensics, same sort of thing. That was push-button forensics. You can do a case really, really quick with magnet forensics. X-Ways now was the tool that forensic people love to do to get deep. That's the tool we used to use to get really, really deep. But I was doing memory forensics, so I would use X-Ways for sure. Intella, again, great for email. And then, so you probably, what I'm showing here is, at this time, a forensic analyst was a Swiss Army knife. I did everything. IDA Pro, right? So unpack portable executables. Tenable. I was doing attack surface scanning. OpenBot, same thing, looking for it. At this time, it was me. I did everything. A lot of times when the customer called and said, hey, we have an issue, they didn't have a clue what the issue was. They just knew they had an issue. They didn't know how they got in. They didn't know, they couldn't provide us any information. So I'd have to kind of back up and say, okay, why don't I scan you first and see where they possibly could have got in? And then I'll go from there instead of going from the inside out. So the Swiss Army knife of a forensic Burp Suite, so same thing, doing some web forensics. We did have some EDR at the time. Tanium, Carbon Black was probably the biggest one at the time. And then FireEye, with their FireEye HX endpoint, was really coming on steam at the time. So what was the state of the IT teams at that time? Very few customers had cyber analysts. Okay, many of them had an IT manager. Many had a cybersecurity manager. But that cybersecurity manager was not hands-on. They were pretty much to direct and point and to coordinate. And I'm not even talking about small companies. I'm talking about banks. I was dealing with Canadian banks at this point that only had a cybersecurity manager. And when they had an issue, we had to work together to figure out where could those logs possibly be in your enterprise. The IT teams at the time were siloed. Very, very siloed. The person that looked after the firewall only knew that firewall. Knew nothing else about the enterprise. Nothing. Penetration testing, vulnerability management, risk management, they were not a priority because there was nothing driving it. And it cost money. And it cost resources. Most companies didn't do it. Time to deploy was very, very long. We always found that customers tried to look into it on their own to save money. In doing so, they lost data, they corrupted data. By the time I got the data, most of the time it was useless, overwritten, tampered with. So now, let's zoom forward a bit. So that was 2013. As we start to move, so I'm saying midway, you start to see the seismic shift starting to happen already. So insurance companies now are starting to drive cybersecurity. They are starting to say, hey, we are paying out a lot of money. So we are not going to do this anymore. You now have to put in the proper things, the proper tools and people and things like that. So this is where insurance companies really started to drive the need for cybersecurity. They were asking for audits. They were asking for proof. We're not just going to pay the $250,000 anymore. Small and medium-sized companies have access finally to endpoint protection. Now, they did before, but not nearly at the level of what enterprise had. Do you remember? Like when you were looking at McAfee and Symantec, there was always a huge difference between what a small accounting company got and what a bank got, which is kind of ridiculous because it's the same. Financial information is financial information. It doesn't matter if it's a small accountant or a bank. It's your financial information. So finally, we start to see things like, hey, Trend Micro had a really, really good offering for small. Sentinel-1 was coming out. So things are starting to move in a good way for small, medium-sized companies. However, MFA is still not adopted. It's out. It's readily available. Very few companies are using it. And because of that, business email compromise, BEC, takes off like a vengeance. I'm not even kidding. We could get 10 calls a day for companies who had a business email compromise on either their Google Workspace or their Microsoft. Backups are consistently performed. They're never tested. So when they do need them, or they happen to get ransomware, it doesn't work because they never tested it. Large enterprises are starting to adopt network forensics. So at this time, in the year before 2016, 2015, I was working at Bluecoat, and I was in their advanced threat team, working specifically with security analytics, network forensics. Now, this was really interesting. So see, we're at endpoint protection, and we're at network forensics. And the reason is because network forensics, we didn't have to deploy anything other than appliance. We didn't have to ask anybody to push anything. We didn't need certificates. I could go in with my security analytics box, literally go to a span port, and see everything that was happening on that network. Every IP, everything in a session state-aware way. Emphasis now on responding. From forensics, emphasis on responding. What were our roadblocks? Lack of customer knowledge of their own environment. So I sat in on a very, very large customer, had a PowerPoint up of their environment, network diagram. Left-hand side, beautiful stuff. Everything you want to see, new stack, everything. Right-hand side of the screen said legacy. I was like, well, what's over there? I'm kind of clue. I'm like, but it's connected to that? Yeah. Okay. Great. I'm trying to build an incident response plan for them on a network they don't know. But they expect me to know. Lack of deployed tools. So again, customers are not having tools on site. I'm having to come with tools. I'm having to come with my network forensic stuff. And when I do try and deploy a Sentinel-1 or so, it takes forever with their, because I can't deploy it. I basically have to provide a package to their IT team and say, can you deploy this? And then I can start to do what I need to do. There's a lack of cyber regulations at this time. So insurance is driving good security practices, but nothing else. Still, time to respond from the customer's point of view, it's still dreadfully slow. They're waiting way too long. I mean, ideally, I want no more than 48 hours after an incident to get me hands-on looking at logs. There's a lack of policies and procedures. They just don't exist. And again, I'm not talking about small companies. Right? 2020, I went into a mid-sized government contractor. So mid-size means they have about 3,000 to 5,000 employees. Some pretty heavy contracts. No cybersecurity department whatsoever. No policies. No governance. IT team just throws, semantic out on all the endpoints. We've got security. Lack of understanding on how much budget to allocate and where to allocate. How much should we spend? What do I spend it on? There's understandably a lot of vendor fatigue with customers. As you're just bombarded, what do I spend it on? I have to make the right decision or I'll get fired. Now, I go back and say lack of policies and procedures, and Ben and I were having a good discussion about this morning. Policies and procedures, it doesn't mean that it has to be a weight. That doesn't mean a good policy and procedure. It means understandable. Having nothing is negligent. You have to have something. So here, I'm very familiar with Incident Response Consortium. I spoke there in Arlington, Virginia. But the most simple web search in the world would provide you a flow diagram on how to work through an incident. which any one of you in here right now could take this and put it into a document and say, okay, we haven't had the resources of time to really flush it out, but in the meantime, we are adopting this. So you've gone from nothing to something. And that's what we have to do. That's what we have to encourage people to do, is to go from nothing to something, and something that'll work through a method, through a process that'll get you through that incident. Simple flow diagram. They're all freely available. And actually, there's actually tons of stuff on the web now that you can actually just take. So now we've got to analysis, right? Where are the log sources? What are we going to do? What are the questions we're going to ask? You could literally take this flow diagram and any IT person could work through an incident. So my point here is there is no reason to have nothing. Mandatory breach reporting. Look at the dates here. 2018. Well, the U.S., on the federal side, for some reason, they just do not want it. They have been fighting. They've had several come before for a vote, and they've all failed. Now, most state level have mandatory breach reporting, but federal level. GDPR 2016, UK 2018. This is all relatively new. Right? Remember I was talking about seismic shifts? This is actually like halfway through, close to the end of the date time I'm talking about, that we're only just starting to get to the point where we go, yeah, we really should start to really get a handle on these breaches we're having in there. 2018. So we have a shifting dynamic. If you remember before, I talked about hackings versus ransomware. Now all of a sudden, ransomware is sweeping. That's all we ever hear. Hardly get any calls for hackings, espionage, employee stuff. It's ransomware is just wiping companies out, and that's what we're responding to. And that's kind of the point that I'm talking here. So many things were happening and in play, but what was taking over at the time? And ransomware was the big one. Supply chain attacks were on the rise. The thing about the supply chain attacks is we were waking up to problems we didn't know we had. Okay, so with a supply chain attack, here's the funny thing. And I list out a couple, but I'll just mention it now. What was it? 3CX on the Polycoms and all that. So here's the thing. Companies were calling us because they didn't know if they had it. They knew there's a massive problem happening in the world right now. They didn't even know if they were affected by it. So the first thing we had to do is we had to get on site, and we first of all had to do a wide scan, look at package, look at everything, application type, and say, okay, you do or don't have 3CX in your environment. And then when we do find it, then we have to track back, find the device, find the firmware, and then tell them if they're affected by it. And then if they're affected by it, then we have to do the forensics. So you see, and that's largely because of poor practices. Because they don't have the proper CMDB, they don't have a sanctioned application list, they don't have everything that would have told them in the first place if they had the device and could have just pointed to it, and we could have. So we had to take this long road to tell them, are you even affected by this thing that you woke up to that's sweeping the world right now? Same thing with solar winds and all these different things. Cloud attacks are on the rise. They're just, same thing, like, so many times, I can't tell you how many investigations I've done for credentials in S3 buckets. Right? We all hear about it, we all know about it, and yet even today, probably sometime next week, we'll hear about, well, the credentials were found in S3 buckets. Now, the customer has more tools now because insurance is driving it, and there's different things, really, as drivers with the governance framework. So they do have endpoint protection, like we talked about. They do have proxies on their web. They have some form of analytics. They have some form of firewall. They're just not working together in any way, shape, or form. They just, here's our firewall. Here's our proxy. Proxy guy knows nothing about firewall. Firewall guy knows nothing about proxy. Firewall is not sending X originating IP. proxy is not forwarding X originating IP. So now poor incident responder here is trying to get a log that came from a firewall through a proxy and then back out, and nothing's passing information in any which way. All I end up getting is the border router IP. Cyber analysts are becoming standard. So great. We now have a level below a cyber analyst who's kind of looking after some testing, some analysis, and hoping to bring those teams together now. There is a shift now from endpoint, EDR, endpoint detection, MDR, managed detection. We're starting to see some SOC seeing. Starting. Walked into a company, walked into their IT operations room. They have LogRhythm. I have no problem with LogRhythm. I love LogRhythm. It's great. Incident responder forensics guy. They've got the two screens up there, and I walk in, I'm like, take a look at it. Take a look at the IT analyst. What's that say? Hasn't got the foggiest. It's not got the absolute foggiest what's scrolling through that screen. And then I turned to them and said, I'm a 20-year forensic analyst incident responder. I haven't got a clue what that says. And it's not because I don't know. It's because it's not meaningful data in any way, shape, or form. They are literally just taking raw logs, firing it at the LogRhythm, and saying, look, we have SOC. What's important to you? What should we be finding here? If an analyst looks at that screen, what should we be looking for? Half the time, I find that most of those things are pointing out system errors, right? That there's a system error here, or things that are going on with the LogRhythm, but not meaningful things about access and IPs and IOCs and things like that. It should be very clear to anybody looking at that screen, what should we respond to? Advanced Persistent Threat, APT, becomes word of the day. Don't we love that in IT? There's almost word of the day, right? EDR, MDR, APT. I remember, I think it was 2014, that the government of Canada actually put out a job posting for somebody to specifically research what is APT. Now, APT, as you probably know, is a term coined by the U.S. Army, right, for advanced persistent threats. Now, the interesting thing, though, is that the focus at this time shifts away from the Army to corporations, because corporations are now being hit hard by these APT groups. APT groups are sanctioned by their governments. They are employees of their government. Now, I just listed a couple of supply chain hacks here just to remind your head, right? What were the things we were dealing with? The MoveIt, the 3CX, and SolarWinds, and Kaseya, Atlassian. Now, British Airways, geez, that's a case there where it had really nothing to do with BA, but the major, right? And same thing with Okta. Really had nothing to do with their customers. It was the fact that they were hit that affected all their customers. Now, looking at the APTs again here, right? So here's just a couple groups to look at that really affected enterprise and not so much government. Lazarus Group, the Sony hack, Fancy Bear, which is just still around today, right? But Hillary Clinton, 2016. So look at these dates, all right? 2014, 2016. Seismic shift in attackers and techniques and what we're responding to. Do we have the tools at the time to respond to something like this? The Elephantine, Midnight Blizzard. It is extremely ironic, and again, I'm not poking fun at anybody, but Microsoft was tracking Midnight Blizzard as an APT group that was specifically targeting Microsoft resources. Well, they weren't just targeting Microsoft resources, they were targeting Microsoft. And they're the ones that broke in and got the source code. Right? So put it in perspective again. Us, the people in this room, are trying to protect our corporations with the limited budget resources, lack of policy, procedure, governance against any one of these. So, current tools. Interesting. On the forensic side, not much has changed. NCASE is still a leader right there. X-Ways is still, I go to this day. I still love X-Ways. Balcasoft is kind of a new entrant. It's got some interesting things. I don't really use it, but it's interesting. Magnet Forensics is still around. They've now got instant response triage and things like that. It's kind of cool. But now we have cloud-native tools. So both Google, Microsoft provide tools to do those investigations on their site. Vector. Has anybody heard of Vector? This is not, I don't work for them. It's a tool I love. Attack breach simulation. Remember way back when I said I had to be a Swiss Army knife? Well, attack breach simulation lets you test to see, geez, are we open to this? Could we be, based on the IOCs, could we be exploited, compromised by Fancy Bear? Really cool stuff. And then, of course, so we're seeing more EDR. Sentinel-1, widely deployed. I'm not going to say I don't want any. Let's just switch to Tanium. Tanium's still out there quite a lot. And then SandSift. I mean, they just keep updating. It's great. It's a nice little distribution that I think any hands-on forensic person probably loves. So, current cyber incident landscape. Hey, we do have cyber teams, including incident responders, cyber threat now. I'm seeing more integrated teams now. We now have regulations. Regulations are now coming in to drive cybersecurity. I mean, obviously here in the UK you have NIS, NIS2. You have things like your CREST, which really helps. Companies are working towards cybersecurity compliance now. I'm seeing this all the time with NIST, CMMC. Most companies do have endpoint. Some enterprise companies, I've worked with a lot of them, have very skilled teams now. Incident response is being integrated now into their main IT tools, ServiceNow, SolarWinds. There's more, so digital forensics hasn't gone anywhere. There's been a shift from mobile. We do hardly any phones now. Like, especially if it's an Apple, just forget about it. But we're seeing a huge uptick in drone forensics, OT forensics, vehicle forensics, less on mobile. Lots of other areas opening up that are exciting now. What does a modern enhanced capability IR team look like? Forensic analyst, incident response analyst and manager, vulnerability specialist. So breaking down that Swiss Army capability I had before and now having teams. And I've been really, really fortunate to work on many enhanced IR teams. And it's great. We have a common communication platform. When I need something, I can hop onto it. And basically, we operate as kind of a military form where I can execute actions. If I need something done, we have a form, I execute the action, and I say, hey, defense team, vulnerability team, I need an attack surface on, boom. And I get the report back, and I can do what I need to do. I don't need to do that anymore. You can talk right to the red team specialist, the SOC, SIEM analyst. So it's a specialization on investigation, incident management, threat intelligence, breach attack simulation all together. Very, very powerful. That's how it should be. So are we there yet? Wow. You know, that team I just talked about is primarily at managed service providers. There are some really, really big companies out there, especially in the defense sector, that have those teams. But in general, I find most teams do not have the enhanced IR capability. They have some. My good buddy Joe Cummins always told me, you can't buy security, but you can get security. Now, that may mean buying some tools here and there, but just buying a tool doesn't do anything because it has to be configured properly, administered properly. All the way through this presentation, I've been highlighting in green the things that companies are still not doing. I think everybody in this room would agree that if we nailed these, oh, you kind of shifted on me there. We have security. We've got security. We didn't buy security. We got security. And we got security because we have good practices. And that's where the focus needs to be. We're having a problem now that when we finally get a cyber analyst and they get up to speed, they leave. It is so hard to keep a cyber analyst in a role for any length of time. We lose that knowledge all the time, and there's a constant stream of new people coming in. Misconfiguration deployed tools every single day. Every single day, this is what I'm dealing with. Time to respond from customers still way too long. I mean, you're all familiar with this, right? But these are the problems we still face. So that's why I say, like, the problems I faced in 2013, even though we have way better tools and we have way different attack vectors and way more complicated, the fundamentals are still, at the least case, not being done. I want to give a special thanks out to Mike Kudalski. That's where I work now. I'm a senior advisor in OT security, which is a lot of fun because security architecture, I do detection engineering with the SOC on OT, and I do incident response forensics on OT. So it's kind of a fun place to be right now. And then my colleagues, John Priya, Joe Cummins, and John Daniele, worked with each one of them for over 20 years. Some way, shape, or form. And each one of them reviewed this presentation and gave feedback. And that's what this industry is about, right? Is that we maintain those relationships and we constantly bounce ideas and we learn from each other. That's B-sides. That's why we're here. But that's a shining example right there on colleagues who over the years, even though we go to different companies, we do different things, still very, very strong and still work together. So that's it. Thanks, everyone. We have time for questions? Is there any questions? Or? Yeah, go ahead.
You said there was a rise in drone forensics.
Yeah.
Is that dominantly from the OT industry, and is that drones that are discovered, or where did that come from?
Yeah, that's a really good point. So that is being driven right now largely by government. We get a lot of calls from correctional facilities, because they're using drones to drop contraband in the yards and things like that. Believe it or not, drones are also being used in corporate espionage in a big way. People have this thought that once they're off the ground floor, you can just write whatever you want on a whiteboard and leave it. Even though a little drone could come up right there and read everything on the whiteboard. So there's two sides to drone forensics. One is being able to understand the air, what is flying around you. And the second one is that, let's say that drone then crashes close to the correctional facility, being able to pull the information off and glean info as to where did it take off from. Are there any other indicators of that stuff? Yeah, great question. Any other? Yeah.
So in terms of tooling, what's your opinion on Velociraptor? What have you sort of seen?
I don't use it, but yeah. I've heard of it, but I don't use it. Do you use it, or?
Yeah, we put it in place about a year and a bit ago for a need for forensic tools. So it's like essentially like having an endpoint agent that's pretty much all the sand sift components and
nice.
Some tools in a box with some capabilities of cable and such. So it seems to work really well.
Oh, that's great. So Velociraptor, check it out. Yeah, that's the thing about being a forensic analyst is I have a list, a mile-wide long of tools I would love to play with. But there's a reality of what will, my companies buy me. And but that's great. Thanks for your input there. People will check it out. Anything else? All right. Well, thank you so much. And hey, feel free to reach out on LinkedIn if you want and keep the chat going. Thank you.